Officers accused him of stealing his own car, unaware that before them stood a black billionaire whose companies supported their very city. The humiliation and anger he felt became the catalyst for a battle that shocked everyone when the truth came to light. What he did next will surprise even the most discerning. But let's start from the beginning. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button to support the fight against systemic racism. James Anderson had stopped at a downtown restaurant, stepping out of his luxurious black Bentley. That evening, he was meeting potential investors to discuss new contracts. Dressed in a sharp business suit, with a neatly trimmed beard and a confident gaze, he walked toward the restaurant entrance, expecting no problems. Around him, the typical hustle and bustle of a big city unfolded. The evening lights, hurried passers-by, the sound of traffic. But beneath that routine, an unseen threat lurked. After a successful dinner, James stepped out toward his car, planning to continue the evening with his family. However, as soon as he approached his vehicle, two police officers quickly closed in on him. Both officers, middle-aged white men, didn't bother to introduce themselves. One of them immediately placed his hand on his gun, signaling his readiness for aggressive action. "Hands on the hood!" one of the officers barked sharply, leaving no time for explanations. James froze for a moment, surprised by the officer's sudden hostility. He tried to calmly respond. "This is my car. What's going on?" But the second officer grabbed his arm and pushed him against the car, searching him for weapons. "We got a report of a stolen car," the officer said coldly. "This vehicle's been flagged as stolen." "But that's a mistake. I have all the documents," James replied, feeling his voice growing firmer, even as fear and anger swelled inside him. Ignoring his words, the officers handcuffed him and began searching the car. Bystanders who witnessed the scene started pulling out their phones to record what was happening. James felt humiliated. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but to these officers, his success and his belonging to the upper class didn't matter. To them, he was just another black man who had taken something that wasn't his. A family with young children walked by, and he overheard a boy ask his mother, "Mom, what did that man do?" Those words struck James like a dagger to the heart. All his achievements, all the years of hard work and success, were being reduced in that moment to a cruel prejudice. James wanted to speak out, to defend himself, but the handcuffs bound him not only physically, but morally. All he could do was watch as two white officers destroyed his reputation in front of dozens of onlookers. "We'll sort this out at the station," one of the officers said coldly, shoving James into the police car. James remained silent. He knew that any wrong word could worsen the situation, but in his mind, a plan was already taking shape. He wasn't going to let this go. What had happened here on this street was just the beginning. He knew that ahead of him lay a fight, not just for justice, but for the reform of the very system that allowed such injustice to happen. The police car pulled away, leaving behind a crowd of shocked witnesses and an increasing number of videos that would soon spread across social media, turning James from yet another victim of racial profiling into a symbol of resistance. As the cell door closed behind James, he felt a deepening sense of humiliation and helplessness. The police station was cold and dehumanizing. They placed him in a solitary cell without explaining how long they would hold him. James sat on the hard wooden bench, reflecting on the absurdity of it all. He was a millionaire, a successful businessman, a man who had created jobs and supported the local community. And all of that had been erased in an instant, simply because he was a black man driving an expensive car. Hours passed, and James still hadn't been able to contact his lawyer. The officers ignored his requests, looking at him with cold disdain. In their eyes, he was just a suspect, and his explanations didn't matter. To them, he was proof that their ingrained prejudices were justified. The officers continued to approach him with further interrogations. Their questions made no sense. They weren't trying to uncover the truth, only to confirm their own biases. "How could you afford a car like this?" one officer sneered, leaning over James. "I earned it through hard work," James responded calmly, holding back his emotions. He knew that showing anger would only make things worse. "Doubt it," the officer smirked cynically. "Black guys don't drive cars like this unless they're dealing drugs." Those words cut James like a knife. He knew that even if he managed to prove his innocence, these men would never change their beliefs. They had already decided who he was, and this lie was a comfortable reality for them. James felt an internal conflict growing. On one hand, his anger was rising, and he wanted to immediately prove these people wrong. On the other hand, his mind urged him to stay calm. He understood that the system was against him, and he needed to act wisely. Meanwhile, outside the station, the situation was spiraling out of control. Videos of James's arrest had already spread across social media. People began asking questions. How could such a respected man, known for his contributions to business and charity, be arrested for stealing his own car? Comments flooded in, mostly condemning the police's actions, labeling it as another instance of racial discrimination. The press became interested in the case, and reporters began gathering outside the police station. Local activists, learning of the incident, organized a peaceful protest, demanding justice and James's release. The issue was no longer just a personal tragedy. It had become a symbol of systemic injustice. Finally, after several hours, with the situation outside escalating, the police decided to reconsider their stance. Journalists and lawyers began calling the station, demanding explanations. One of the officers entered James's cell with visible displeasure and said, "You're lucky. Your lawyer's here. But remember, we're just doing our job." James looked at the officer with bitterness in his eyes. He knew that for people like this, his luck was nothing more than a fortunate coincidence. But for him, it wasn't luck. It was a fight for respect as a human being. His lawyer, a tall African-American man with a stern expression, entered the cell and shook James's hand. "We'll get you out of here, but this won't end here," he said quietly. "We'll pursue justice." James nodded. He was about to leave this place, but the fight was just beginning. The system had shown its true face again, and now he was determined to change it. The next morning, the situation had completely shifted. The video of James's arrest had gone viral, spreading across social media at incredible speed. Hashtags like #JusticeForJames and #racial profiling began flooding Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Reporters swarmed the police station, demanding statements. Outside the building, a crowd of protesters gathered, demanding James's release and an investigation into the police's actions. Under the pressure of public opinion, the police leadership could no longer ignore the situation. An internal investigation was immediately launched. The station's chief, visibly irritated by the developments, held a press conference where he tried to justify his officers' actions, citing standard procedures and James's suspicious behavior. But these words only fanned the flames. To the public, it appeared as an attempt to cover up blatantly racist behavior by the police. Meanwhile, James's lawyer was working vigorously, both in the legal and media spheres. He gave several interviews, explaining what had happened to his client, emphasizing that this was not just a random incident, but a manifestation of systemic racism. James Anderson is a successful businessman, but to these officers, he was just a black man driving a luxury car, the lawyer said on one news channel. "This isn't about a stolen car, it's about stolen freedom, stolen dignity, and stolen rights." While the media kept James's case in the spotlight, an unexpected twist occurred. One no one could have predicted. One of the police officers involved in the arrest suddenly realized he had seen James before. Not on the street, not in a photo, but at a corporate event hosted by a company that had sponsored a charitable program supporting local communities and veterans. This program had been launched by one of James's companies to aid veterans and local police. The officer, stunned by this revelation, understood that the man they had arrested was funding the very programs that had benefited many of his colleagues. This information quickly spread through the police station. Now the officers realized who they had detained, and the situation became even more precarious. The leadership attempted to downplay the incident, offering James a quiet release and even compensation for the emotional distress. But James refused to back down. He wasn't looking for compensation. He was seeking justice and change. At the next press conference, James himself stepped forward, flanked by lawyers and activists. His words were calm but powerful. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for equality. I'm not asking for compensation. I'm asking for respect. This case isn't about money. It's about every person who has ever faced injustice because of the color of their skin. We can't change the past, but we can change the future." His words were met with a wave of approval from the crowd. People began to applaud, chanting his name. Despite the stress and injustice he had faced, James had become a symbol of strength and resilience for many people. Meanwhile, local authorities, under public pressure and thanks to James's initiatives, began drafting a plan to reform police procedures, initiating a program to educate officers on racial sensitivity and cultural competence. The officers involved in the arrest were temporarily suspended, and their future in law enforcement was in question. Following the high-profile press conference, James Anderson's case garnered national attention. The media continued to cover the incident, and the story became a symbol of the fight against racial discrimination in law enforcement. Politicians, activists, and public figures joined the conversation, calling for systemic changes. However, for James, this wasn't just a story on television. It was a personal battle for justice, to ensure that this never happened to anyone else again. A few weeks after the arrest, the police department announced the results of its internal investigation. The officers involved in James's arrest were found guilty of misconduct and procedural violations. They were dismissed from the force, and a criminal investigation against them was underway. For many, this was proof that even within a system riddled with bias, change was possible. But James didn't stop there. He launched a foundation aimed at reforming the police system and supporting victims of racial discrimination. This foundation became not just his personal project, but a driving force for an entire community. James invested significant funds into programs to train police officers on racial sensitivity and to prevent bias. His efforts began to bear fruit. The city's authorities, under public pressure, and thanks to James's foundation, instituted mandatory training for all police officers. Officers were now required to attend courses aimed at dismantling racial stereotypes and improving interactions with Black communities. These measures were seen as a positive step forward, though James knew that the fight against the system wouldn't be quick. Meanwhile, one of the officers involved in his arrest publicly apologized. He admitted his guilt and expressed remorse for his actions. The officer explained that he had been part of a system that had shaped his views and biases for many years. "I was wrong," he said. "I judged people by their appearance, not by their actions. Arresting Mr. Anderson opened my eyes to my own misconceptions." James saw this as an important step toward change. He wasn't seeking revenge or to see these people destroyed. His goal had always been to transform the system and improve society. The officer's apology was a powerful symbol that even those who are part of the problem can change and contribute to the solution. In the end, thanks to James's efforts, the situation changed not only for him, but for many others. Anderson's story became a lesson for police officers across the country and inspired active reforms. His foundation continued to grow, attracting more supporters, and became an influential organization, working towards systemic changes in law enforcement. For James, this journey wasn't just about fighting prejudice. It became a symbol of how even the most severe injustices can be turned into a force for change. Now, his name was not associated with a victim of racism, but with a leader who not only withstood the onslaught of the system, but also changed it. James found the strength to turn his pain and humiliation into actions that helped thousands of people believe that justice is indeed possible. The story ended not with the triumph of one man, but with the beginning of change for an entire community.